The Bering Sea is no place for the faint of heart. Out here, the water is a churning, icy gray, and the sky often matches. It's a place that tests you, pushes you to your limits, and then pushes some more. On the deck of the Northern Fury, this was just another day at the office. We were hunting for king crab, the treasure of these unforgiving waters. Captain Jake Anderson stood in the wheelhouse, his eyes scanning the horizon. He's a young captain, but he has the sea in his blood. He carries the weight of his crew on his shoulders, and you can see it in the way he stares at the weather charts, a constant frown etched on his face. This job isn't just about fishing, it's about survival. Below deck, the crew was a mix of old salts and greenhorns, each man essential to the operation. Sven Olsen, the deck boss, was a mountain of a man with a beard as wild as the sea itself. He'd seen more storms than most people have seen sunny days, and his calm presence was the anchor for the rest of the crew. Then there was Marco, the engineer, a wizard with a wrench who could make the boat's heart, the engine, sing, even when it wanted to die. Liam, the youngest on board, was still learning the ropes, his youthful energy a stark contrast to the grim reality of the job. And Leo, the cook, kept everyone's spirits up with hot meals and even hotter jokes, a vital role when morale is as important as the machinery. Life on the boat is a constant grind, a rhythm of baiting, dropping, and hauling pots. Each pot weighs over 700 pounds, a steel cage that we hope comes up full of crab. The work is backbreaking, repetitive, and dangerous. A loose line can take a limb, a swinging pot can crush a man, and the icy deck is a constant hazard. But there's a camaraderie that you won't find anywhere else. We share stories, we laugh, and we look out for each other. Down in the galley, Leo would be telling a tall tale about a fish he once caught, making Liam laugh so hard he'd nearly spit out his coffee. These moments are the glue that holds a crew together when the waves start to build. The air had begun to change. A sharp, cold wind was picking up from the north, and the waves were growing taller, their white caps looking like angry teeth. Jake knew what was coming. The weather reports had been forecasting a storm, but the forecasts out here are more like suggestions. The sea does what it wants. The crab grounds we were on had been paying off, the pots coming up heavy. We were close to our quota, close to the big payday that makes all this suffering worthwhile. But the approaching storm front was a dark line on the horizon, a promise of chaos that even the most seasoned fisherman respects. The easy part of the trip was over. The real test was about to begin. The decision fell squarely on Captain Jake's shoulders. The radio crackled with warnings from other boats in the fleet. Most were running for the shelter of St. Paul Island, choosing safety over profit. It was the smart move, the sensible one. But Jake stared at the charts, his mind racing. The numbers were good. The pots were full. Another 24 hours on these grounds, and they would fill the tanks, securing a massive haul that could set up his crew and their families for the year. Leaving now meant leaving a fortune on the seafloor, a fortune that another boat might snatch up once the storm passed. It was a gamble of epic proportions. He called Sven up to the wheelhouse. The old deck boss listened quietly, his gaze fixed on the churning sea outside the window. "The storm's a big one, Jake," Sven said, his voice a low rumble. "The boys are tired, but they're tough." He didn't tell Jake what to do. He just laid out the facts. This is the code of the sea. The captain makes the call, and the crew follows. Jake looked at the faces of his men through the wheelhouse window. He saw their exhaustion, but he also saw their trust in him. They were his responsibility. Their lives were in his hands. The weight of that trust was heavier than any crab pot. "We stay," Jake finally announced over the intercom, his voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. "Secure the deck, batten down everything. We're going to ride this out and we're going to finish this haul." A mix of fear and adrenaline shot through the crew. This was it. This was the moment that defined a season, the kind of decision that makes or breaks a captain. Down below, Liam's eyes went wide, while Marco just nodded and headed for the engine room, knowing his work was about to get a lot more critical. Leo started brewing an extra-large pot of coffee, muttering, "Looks like it's going to be a long night, boys." The gamble was made. There was no turning back now. The Northern Fury turned its bow slightly to face the oncoming swells, preparing for the fight. The time for talk was over. Now, it was all about action. Every man knew his job. Every man knew the risks. They were putting their faith in their captain, in their boat, and in each other. As the first of the monster waves began to crash over the bow, sending sheets of freezing spray across the deck. The reality of Jake's decision began to set in. They were no longer just fishing, they were challenging the full might of the Bering Sea. The storm hit them with the force of a freight train. The world outside the Northern Fury became a chaotic mess of wind, water, and darkness. Waves the size of small buildings crashed over the deck, turning it into a deadly, swirling pool of icy water. Every man moved with purpose, their motions practiced and precise. Sven directed the crew with hand signals and roars that were barely audible over the screaming wind. They worked to secure the stacks of crab pots, lashing them down with heavy chains. A single loose pot could become a 700-pound wrecking ball, capable of smashing through the hull or a man with equal ease. Suddenly, a rogue wave, bigger and more violent than the others, slammed into the vessel's side. The Northern Fury lurched violently, throwing Liam off his feet. He slid across the treacherous, icy deck, heading straight for the open railing. For a heart-stopping second, time seemed to freeze. Without a moment's hesitation, Sven lunged, his big frame moving with surprising speed. He grabbed the back of Liam's overalls just as the boy's boots went over the side. He hauled him back onto the deck, his face a mask of grim determination. "Stay clipped in," Sven bellowed, his voice raw. "The sea will take any chance you give it." Down in the engine room, Marco was fighting his own battle. The violent pitching of the boat was putting immense strain on the engine. Alarms blared as a hydraulic line burst, spraying hot fluid across the room. Marco, drenched in sweat and seawater that dripped from the ceiling, expertly bypassed the broken line, his hands working with a surgeon's precision in the deafening chaos. He knew that if the engine failed, they would be dead in the water, completely at the mercy of the storm. The boat was their only shield against the sea's rage, and Marco was its guardian, a lone warrior in a metal cavern. Fear was a constant companion, a cold presence in the gut of every man. But courage was there too. It was in Liam getting back on his feet and immediately returning to his task, his hands shaking but his resolve firm. It was in Leo, who somehow managed to wedge himself in the galley to keep a pot of stew from flying across the room, ensuring the men would have a hot meal. It was in Jake's calm voice over the radio, coordinating with his crew, his focus absolute despite the ship groaning and creaking around him as if it were about to be torn apart. In the heart of the storm, they were more than a crew. They were a single unit, fighting for their collective survival. As dawn broke, the storm's fury began to subside. The wind quieted its scream to a howl, and the mountainous waves slowly shrank to angry hills. The Northern Fury was battered and bruised, coated in a thick layer of ice, but she was still afloat. The crew, utterly exhausted and soaked to the bone, stood on the deck and surveyed the scene. They had done it. They had faced the beast and won. A quiet sense of triumph hung in the air, thick as the morning fog. They had finished stacking the last of the pots just as the worst of the storm hit, and Jake's gamble had paid off. The tanks below were full of crab. The journey back to port was different. The tension was gone, replaced by a deep, weary camaraderie. In the galley, the men gathered, nursing mugs of hot coffee. Liam looked at Sven with a new level of respect and gratitude. "You saved my life, Sven," he said quietly. The big deck boss just clapped him on the shoulder. "We look out for our own," he grunted. "Now eat your stew before Leo throws it at you." Laughter, genuine and relieved, filled the small space. They had stared into the abyss together, and that shared experience created a bond stronger than any steel cable on the boat. Jake stood in the wheelhouse, watching the coastline of St. Paul Island appear on the horizon. He felt the exhaustion deep in his bones, but he also felt a profound sense of pride. He had tested his crew, and he had tested himself, and they had not been found wanting. He had risked everything, and because of the skill and courage of the men he led, they had succeeded. He knew that the money was important, but it was the trust he had earned from his crew that was the real prize. That trust was priceless, earned in the crucible of a Bering sea storm. Life as a fisherman is a life of extremes. Extreme work, extreme danger, and extreme reward. It forges a special kind of person and a special kind of friendship. As the Northern Fury steamed towards the safety of the harbor, its tanks full and its crew intact, the men knew they had a story to tell. It was a story of survival, of teamwork, and of the unbreakable bonds formed when a small group of men faced the awesome power of nature and emerged together on the other side. They were more than a crew. They were brothers, forged in the icy fury of the sea.